Hello and welcome to the newsroom with Sana. Today we're going to take a look at a number of recent developments taking place, and it's important, of course, to see how exactly the situation moves further. The way that we've looked at the US-Iran conflict is important in terms of the direction that it's taking, and we see that the important factor of China is also there, which is being largely discussed considering where the situation is at the moment. While a number of exchanges have been conducted with regards to proposals being made and received and discussed, there is still a lot that remains to be seen as to which side this whole course is going to take and what really is going to be the impact of key players like China, especially with regards to the US president's upcoming visit to the country. In our next segment, we're also going to focus on Pakistan's own relationship with China, which is celebrating 75 years together. And this, of course, has been a journey which is deeply rooted in historic ties, but also has been time tested with a number of catastrophes and geopolitical changes that this friendship has endured. And in what ways has it strengthened the relationship, but also in terms of the strategic partnership that the two countries have and can likely leverage in the future as well. And lastly, we're going to be taking a look at what is happening with regards to the situation in West Bengal in terms of the kind of statements coming in from the leadership and the way, of course, that the BJP now is in power after many, many years, what really can be done about the situation there and what the future awaits for this state. We're going to start off with our first segment on the very important developing dynamics with regards to the US and Iran and the upcoming visit of the US president to China. And for that, we've been joined by Dr. Jeffrey Miller, who's a geopolitical analyst, and Mr. Oliver Blarrell, who's a former analyst at the French Ministry of Defense. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us and being a part of the discussion today. Dr. Joffrey, let me start with you in terms of how you're looking at the current situation, especially in terms of since the start of the conflict till now, and in what ways do you think that we're closer towards reaching a deal? Because while at least these diplomatic channels are open, there is a cessation of hostilities for the moment. There still seems to be a back and forth going on in terms of proposals and discussions. How close do you think we are to an actual deal?
Well, good evening to you. Thanks for having me on the program. I think we're in a stalemate, essentially. We have been since the 8th of April when the ceasefire came into place. We're virtually at the stage now where the length of the ceasefire, the duration of the ceasefire, has been as long as the war itself was that began back on February 28th. And it doesn't feel that we're any closer to a durable solution. There are various proposals that go back and forth and that get leaked to the media, but the United States and Iran, they don't even seem to be reading the same book, let alone being on the same page. The United States really wants to make this all about the nuclear issue and the nuclear dimension and those 440 kilograms of enriched uranium that Iran possesses. Iran, for its part, wants to simply declare an end to the war and it wants to make it all about the Strait of Hormuz and its future control, as it would see it, of the strait, plus the lifting of oil sanctions against Iran and the unfreezing of its assets. And the United States just doesn't want to even consider that. So Donald Trump spoke out on Monday and called it complete garbage what Iran's latest proposal was and described the ceasefire as being on life support, which I think is probably an accurate description of the situation. And of course, now Donald Trump is heading to China to meet with his counterpart, Chinese President Xi Jinping. And he's in the position of having to ask his Chinese counterpart for help effectively with this war because this war is still ongoing. And remember, Donald Trump delayed this visit to China to mid-May in the hope that the war would all be over by this point, and yet it is just simply not. We have this ceasefire. It's a shaky ceasefire that is violated from time to time from the Iranian side, and we still have the war raging on in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah, despite a ceasefire supposedly being in place there since mid-April. So I think everything, the ceasefire is really hanging by a thread. There is no real peace deal waiting in the wings, ready to be signed, despite the leaks that come out from time to time. And I think if you want to know really what's happening with this conflict, simply look at the oil price. Brent oil's up as we speak around the $107 mark, which tells you there's really no optimism from oil traders and the oil markets that this conflict is going to be resolved anytime soon.
Right. Mr. Blair, in what ways do you think that when we look at what is being discussed, especially in terms of the opening of the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's nuclear program, the central issues, of course, at this point, in what ways do you think that one is going to be more important than the other at this point, while, of course, the international community is facing a lot of economic crises because of the opening of the Strait of Hormuz? That really, of course, essentially is a really important aspect. Because of that, we've seen that the situation still, despite the kind of skirmishes that we have seen, has not been claimed as a violation of the ceasefire. But even so, there's been a lot of emphasis in terms of how the current situation progresses and in what ways will that be impacting then the future decisions. Geoffrey, while we wait for Mr. Blairell, can you also let us know in terms of, oh, you're back, great. So Blairell, can we also, yes, I can see you now. Can we also hear your perspective on where do you think really is the emphasis now in terms of what both the countries are looking at, whether or not a phased out plan will be acceptable to the US, where the nuclear program is left for a different time?
It seems as though there's, as Jeffrey put it, they're not on the same page, let alone the same book. I think that, well, Iran knows that time is on its side because Donald Trump has elections, has prices to and inflation to fight. Basically, that's his biggest enemy today is home inflation and trying to find public support, which is has never been there and is probably dwindling even more now. So that's what is more important for him is to quickly find a solution. The Iranians seem to have a longer goal and longer game there. So that's where there is also discrepancy between their positions. And there's also the fact that the U.S. wants to focus mostly and from the beginning on the nuclear issue, whereas the Iranian are bringing back the pressure on where they have a bigger leverage. That means the Strait of Hormuz and basically taking hostage the whole world economy and saying, well, now it's in the Americans' hands to just stop the attack that they consider as being an attack. So basically, they're putting all the blame on the Americans and saying, well, if ever you want to deal, we're ready to hear one, but we're going to use whatever leverage we have. And the Strait of Hormuz has shown that it's a very effective one.
Right. Dr. Geoffrey, when we see especially the ways in which a lot of the regional and international players and the kind of dynamics that we have seen change over the course of this conflict, in what ways do you think that certain countries will be quite significant in shaping the direction that the US and Iran will take? I understand, of course, that there's been a lot of emphasis in terms of the mediating role of Pakistan. I'll come to that as well. But other than the country that is communicating between the two sides at the moment, what other regional players do you think will be very significant, and especially now that there's a lot of talk around China trying to put in more emphasis on China's role, whether or not it will be willing to or will be exerting is a different question. But in what ways do you think China will be able to influence the matter, if at all?
Look, I think this conflict is a very complex one, and it's the biggest conflict in the world right now. So I think there's a lot of room for mediators, both publicly, as Pakistan has played its role largely, and behind the scenes, and a number of other countries have played a more of a back channel role, notably Qatar. For example, their foreign minister and prime minister was in United States at the weekend and made a surprise trip to Florida to meet with Steve Witkoff, the White House Special Envoy, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, that was unscheduled, as well as meeting publicly with J.D. Vance in Washington. And Qatar's role apparently was reluctant. I mean, they had been attacked by Iran during this war, but the United States urged them to play that go-between role because, of course, they had been in the past a key mediator when it came to the conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran. So Qatar is clearly involved. You've also got the likes of Egypt, Turkey, and of course, as you say, China itself. And Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, was in China last week for talks. We've had phone calls between the Pakistani foreign minister, Ishaq Dar, and his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi just this week as well. So there's obviously potential for lots of players, I think, to make a difference at the top level. And just this week, given that Donald Trump is heading to Beijing, you really have to say the influence of Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, is quite strong here potentially, because he does have the clout and the leverage here. He has the incentive to really have a deal done in the Strait of Hormuz, if only because China imports around 50% of its oil, 50% of China's oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz, and 90% of the oil from Iran, 90% of Iranian oil that is exported goes to China. So there are a lot of reasons really why China is taking an interest here. They are hurting from this war as much as anyone else. It's causing them economic pain, and it's causing the world economic pain. And your other guest mentioned the inflation figures in the United States, and that's of a concern to China as well, because if the rest of the world stops buying Chinese imports to the same extent because of the cost of living pressures, because they're paying more for fuel, then that is going to be detrimental to the Chinese economy as well. So there's every reason why Xi Jinping and Donald Trump should be talking about the situation in the Middle East this week, and should be trying to find some way forward and some solution. China has the leverage and has the lines of communication with all of the parties really involved in the conflict. So you have to hope that those channels of communication can help to bring about a solution here.
Right. Mr. Blair, we've seen that the U.S. President, of course, the visit of the U.S. President to China is much being talked about in terms of what sort of outcome it will bring to the developing situation. And while, of course, there may not be any concrete rhetoric coming out in terms of what's going on behind the doors, but in what ways do you think that the U.S. and China already understand the kind of support or the kind of role that can be played by the countries involved in changing the dynamics, or at least in helping move things forward? Many experts have argued that there can be a major role that can be played by China if it wishes to, but that, of course, is a big aspect of whether or not China does decide to do that or not.
Yes, I think that China will have will not dive deep into its role, whichever it is. It's probably going to want to have a bigger role, but it'll be behind the scene. It's probably going to be a facilitator more than a mediator. It'll not be a broker. It'll just try to, as it was rightly said by Jeffrey, China has the lines of communication with many actors, and Iran also has lots of lines of communication. It seems as though nobody would have imagined that several years back, but it seems as though the Americans and the Trump administration has closed down most of its own lines of communication with most of its partners, creating disruptions and tensions with its closest allies, and basically putting its Gulf partners at risk by not warning and not protecting them as much as they would. So we're here in a situation which was probably not predicted and not expected, and it seems as though China can use this as a leverage in its global, not just regional, but its global and bilateral arm fight with the U.S., which is starting and will continue over the next decades.
Right. And when we take a look at the ways in which there is also a lot of pressure coming in from within the United States, we've just seen that there has been an increase in the estimate of the kind of cost that this war has been to the United States, up to the tune of $29 billion. And so in what ways do you think that there's more pressure coming in from within the United States that is really affecting Mr. Trump at the moment, while, of course, the decreasing popularity has been there from the start. The economic crisis, of course, is impacting U.S. citizens. There's the congressional aspects as well that are required. But how much of that do you think is mattering to Mr. Trump?
Oh, it's first and foremost. In the United States, the electoral cycles are very short. Once somebody gets elected, he's already looking at the next elections, which if he's a representative, it's 2 years later, which is very short. And when it's the president, he's already looking at the midterms. So the electoral cycle makes it almost important and crucial for any elected representative or a senior executive member to just right away think about the next election. So right now we're 1 year and a half from his election, but already less than a year. It's going to be in November to the midterm elections, if ever there's a Democratic victory. I mean, the Democrats have either one of the houses. Well, that will make everything that all the reforms or bills that the Trump administration wants to pass much more difficult. And he'll be basically lame duck for the next last 2 years of his presidency. So I'm sure that he has that in mind, and I think that will be probably whatever happens whenever they'll be looking at the polls of popularity and ways to get out of what seems to be a quagmire will be very important, because he'll be looking at how the public, the audience in the U.S. is seeing how things are evolving.
Right. Dr. Joffrey, there's also, of course, Israeli interests in the region, and there's also Iran's emphasis on the situation in Lebanon and peace in the larger Middle East. In what ways do you think that the U.S. will be able to cater to that, and whether or not there will be a deal breaker in whatever is being decided between the two?
Yeah, I think the situation in the wider Middle East is of concern to the United States and to the world generally. And I think the Gulf states in particular have been hurt very, very badly by this war. Saudi Arabia's oil exports are down roughly a third, and they are the best off really of the Gulf states, the main oil exporters, the likes of Kuwait and Bahrain and Qatar that are really almost landlocked there in the Gulf of in the Gulf, which is really a lake at the moment because of this blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. They're exporting virtually nothing at the moment. And some of the damage that was done to the facilities, oil and gas facilities, you just think of the Ras Laffan facility in Qatar that was damaged back in mid-March, that took out 17% of Qatar's natural gas exports, a $20 billion hit in annual revenue for up to the next 5 years. And that's just one element of the pain that the Gulf states have felt. They've been acutely affected by this conflict, and everywhere from oil and gas exports right through to tourism and travel. Even now, despite some recovery, Emirates airline is only operating at around half the levels that it was before the war in terms of passenger numbers. So it's look, it's an extreme crisis, and I think perhaps because this conflict is now dragged on, it's become almost normalized that we've started to just see the situation as this long-running conflict. And that is perhaps the most concerning thing. The fact is that this conflict seems to be heading down the front pages a little bit. Other news is taking place, whether it's the Hunter virus cruise ship, or whether it is the upcoming FIFA World Cup. You know, people then begin to focus on other news. Even with the reports about Xi Jinping's meeting with Donald Trump this week, the number of stories that really just talk about the Middle East sort of halfway down and focus on bilateral issues as the main focus between the United States and Iran. Really, the Middle East needs to be front and center of the agenda this week, because this is an absolute cancer on the global economy at the moment and on the Middle East. I mean, the Middle East is really I think the world's theater in terms of conflict, and this conflict that really began way back in 2023 on October 7th with the beginning of the war in Gaza has just continued to spread across the entirety of the Middle East. And this situation that we're seeing now, I think, really is the natural extension of what has happened and what has unfolded in the region since back in 2023. It's really concerning, and I just don't think perhaps we are treating the situation at a level of gravity that it deserves, because I think we're in a crisis mode here. It's on an ongoing, long-running crisis, and that just makes it even worse.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Jeffrey Miller, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Mr. Bland, let me come back with